All right, so in this week's guitar lesson, we're going to be talking about the power of the arpeggio and how it can define your lead and give you safe notes to land on. It gives you a much more melodic sounding lead, and it allows you to play through the chord changes and really hear those changes. So I'm going to play just a little sample here and let you hear what it sounds like without a jam track, just a solo guitar. And actually, we're going to be learning how to do all of this. But just keep in mind, most of this is played, actually 90% of it is played just using arpeggios. There's a few other notes that are thrown in, which are just from your pentatonic scales. So when you can blend your pentatonics with the arpeggios, you get something like this. Okay, so what is an arpeggio and how do you use it? That's really the more important question. An arpeggio is just the notes of a chord. That's it. So if I'm playing a G chord, for example, and I strum that chord, notice I'm playing all those notes together at once. As opposed to an arpeggio, I single them out and play them more like a scale. Same notes. That's the difference between a chord and arpeggio. So where an arpeggio becomes powerful is when it comes to playing a lead. And just think about that logically for a minute. If there was a song with a G chord, somebody's strumming a G chord and you're playing a lead break, obviously any of those notes from the G arpeggio are going to be great notes to use in your lead. In fact, you can use little segments of the arpeggio. That kind of thing. That's where arpeggios start to shine. They give you safe places to land, and they give you little sections of notes that are going to sound good together. It's really just like a scale. You can think of it like a scale in that respect. And where arpeggios really start to shine is when you combine them with scales. So you can think of the arpeggio, if we're thinking about like painting on a canvas, the arpeggio to me is the rough sketch that you might do with some graphite or a pencil, just to sort of get your parameters. And that's, it's your safe place that you're going to work within, and that's what those notes are. They're safe notes to land on. Now we can start adding some color and some definition to it with our scale. So if I were to take that G major arpeggio, which is just G, B, and D, and then I played my G major pentatonic scale, some of those notes along with it, I can combine those two and think of that as sort of one scale. So you can start to hear how those two together give you a very defined and obvious sounding lead that works even without a jam track. You can hear the third interval of the chord. You can hear all of those chord tones. All right, so now we're going to blues things up a little bit. We're going to take that G major arpeggio, which I was just given as an example, and we're going to add a note to it. So instead of it just being G, B, and D, we're going to add a fourth note, which will be our F. And so those are the same notes that would be in my dominant 7 chord. So if I played a G7 chord, I would be playing a G, a B, a D, and an F. And it sounds like that if I play a G7, or this is how we learn it in first position, right? You can hear that sound. That note, that F, is what gives it that color of that flat 7. It makes it sound a little more bluesy. So if I play the arpeggio, the G dominant 7 arpeggio, there's 2 octaves of it, and then we'll come up to this G note. So I want you to learn that first, and notice where I'm playing this. This is a big part of it. So I'm playing this out of the E shape. So we're going to connect everything back to chord shapes from the Cage system. So this is my G chord using the E shape. So now I want to make sure I got my fingers lined up in the right position to be able to do this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my middle finger over that 3rd fret. That's where I'm barring when I'm playing the E chord shape, but I'm just going to put my middle finger there to hit that note. My fingers will line up easier if I do it that way. You'll see as we get into this. So let's play this together. Get out your guitar. We're going to start with the first octave of the G dominant 7 arpeggio. It looks like this. There's your first octave. Now we're going to come up to this G note here on the 5th fret 4th string. That's just a straight, straight up the chord there. And then we're going to add our pinky to that 6th fret 2nd string for that F note up there. So now we've got 2 octaves. And then we're going to cap it off with this G note up here on the 3rd fret 1st string. Those are 2 octaves of your G7 or G dominant 7 arpeggio. And what you want to do is just practice going up and down like this. Do 2 notes each. That's the way I learned to do it. It was kind of like this. And then back down. And when you're doing that, pay attention to that E shape. You can see it in there. You're hitting those notes, but we're obviously adding like this 3rd interval, which wouldn't be in that chord. It's but that's the same note as this note. Right? It's just an octave lower. It's those same 4 notes just repeated over and over again that give us the G dominant 7 arpeggio. So that's the first thing we're going to learn. The next thing we're going to learn is the 4 chord. So the 4 chord, and when you're playing in the key of G, is your C. And our C, we're going to stay in this same neighborhood for all 3 chords, for our G, C, and D. So for our C chord, we're going to choose the A shape. And to play the arpeggio, you're going to take your middle finger and play this time on the 3rd fret 5th string. So we're going to start there and we're going to play a C7 arpeggio. So it looks like this. It looks exactly the same as what we did for G, right? So far it does anyway. Same thing, we're just up a set of strings. So that's going to feel familiar to your fingers. They've already done this dance. Now from here it's going to get a little different because the B string is just tuned differently. So now watch this. From here we're going to come up to this C note on the 5th fret 3rd string, and then we're going to go. Okay? That's your next octave of it. So now we have 2 octaves of a C7 in this A position. So we have. So practice going up that and down that just like you did with a G. Do 2 each. And then back down. And when you're doing that, picture your C chord using the A shape. Picture your C7. So that you can see that flat 7 in there. You've got your C7 up here using that A7 shape. There's that note. So you can see those flat 7s. So that's your 1 chord and your 4 chord in the same neighborhood. The last one we're going to look at is the 5 chord, which is our D chord, and I'm using the C shape to play our D chord. Now, these notes are the same as a D that you would, that you're used to. But you've got this little extension here with your ring finger and your pinky if you're playing, using that C shape. So we're going to start this. We're going to be playing our D7 arpeggio, and we're going to start on this 5th fret 5th string where our pinky is. And we're going to play it like this. There's your flat 7. And that's really all we can get of it in this position, so that we're in the same neighborhood for all 3 of these chords. So now we've got. Now let's walk it back down. Now practice playing up and down that the same way you did for your G and your C, where you do 2 notes each. So once you get somewhat familiar with that, I realize that these are going to feel awkward when you're not used to them. Maybe you're used to playing just your major chords as arpeggios, but when you get into the dominant 7s, it's a different feel. But this opens up everything if you can just kind of stick with me here. So the next level in terms of practice, we're not even at the song yet, I realize that, but the next level is to go through your 1 chord, your 4 chord, and your 5 chord, but connect them. Here's how I would do it. See what I did there? So I went down to this note in my G chord, and then I went up one to get to the C chord. I'm just going to go all the way up and back down. Now watch this. And I just walked it down chromatically there. You can do the chromatic thing too, where you play sort of each note along the way. You know, as long as you don't land on them, they're just passing tones. But that's a great little practice to get your fingers doing their dance. They need to be able to dance the 1 chord, the 4 chord to the 5 chord, and just keep a loop going. Once you're familiar with that, you've got, you know, of the cage system, you've got 3 of the 5 shapes of your dominant 7 arpeggio, which is pretty awesome. So now we're gonna get into this song. This song's gonna be so much easier now because we've basically covered the basis for what we're gonna do, at least for the first half of the song. Let's listen to the first little phrase here, and we'll talk about what's going on. All right, so good news. It starts off with a G7 arpeggio, and you already know this, right? We've already covered this. I'm going to start off by playing the first 3 notes twice, like this. And then we're going to go. So it's a little difference in timing there by stopping. Now we're going to keep going up. So we do the same thing, but with the higher octave. So there's nothing clever there. Right? It's already sounding really bluesy. It's sounding like a lead, and we're just playing up the arpeggio. Now from here, I'm going to play some G minor pentatonic scale licks in this pattern 1. That's where we're at. Right? So I'm going to go. That's the lick. It's really just walking down my minor pentatonic scale pattern 1. Then I come down to this 3rd string and play. So that's a bend on the 5th fret 3rd string. Then play it without the bend. Do a hammer on between the 3rd fret and the 5th fret. And then we go down to the 4th string and play 5, 3, 5. But you can see all these notes are just my G minor pentatonic scale, pattern 1. Now watch this. I'm going to walk up to the 4 chord from here. So I came up to this 5th fret 3rd string. That's my C note. Remember we started our C7 arpeggio here with this C note on the 3rd fret 5th string, and we walked it up like this. That was the 1st octave. Here's the 2nd octave. So I walked it up to this note. So after we get to that note, you can see that I'm just going up the C7 arpeggio, hitting the first 3 notes twice, and then that flat 7, hit that once, come down to the 3rd fret 1st string. So it's, now we're gonna walk it back down. And then that, you can already just hear that it gets me back to this G note, which is back to my 1 chord. And then once I'm back to this 1 chord, I went just a little vamp there off of that G. And you've probably done this before. I always call this the gospel rhythm thing, or the gospel piano thing, because I hear gospel pianos doing it. But anyway, from this G note on the 5th fret 4th string, we're going to bar the first 3 strings on the 3rd fret, but we're only going to play strings 2 and 3, and we're going to hammer on to the 3rd interval of the chord, which is the 4th fret 3rd string. Back to this G note down here, and then that's strings 2 and 3 on the 5th fret, and then back to this. Now that all represents a G chord. Even though I hit this, some of you are going, what is that? Well, that would be like my 2 notes from my C chord. Remember, if you're hanging out on a chord, here's the theory, is when you're hanging out on a chord, you can play that chord in its 4 chord. That's all I'm doing there. You can do that for any chord. Just go to its 4 chord. So then we go to the 5 chord, which is our D, right? And watch this. It's just right down the D7 arpeggio that we've already talked about. Now, just remember, when you're playing an arpeggio, you don't have to always start it like down at the bottom and go up and down. You can start it at any point. You can jump in at any point. If you can remember where those points are, or see them, visualize them, then you can just jump in. You can go up them or down them, but that's what I did here. Started with this G note on the 3rd fret 1st string, and then we go to the 2nd fret 1st string, down to here, 5th fret 3rd string, 2nd fret 3rd string, and then we capped it off with those 2 notes, 4th fret 4th string, and then 5th fret 5th string. So now after I hit this 5th fret 5th string, the D note, I'm going to walk it back to the 4 chord like this. So I'm just walking it down chromatically. 5, 4, 3 on the 5th fret. Notice I landed that with my middle finger so that I can go right up the C7 arpeggio like this. And then we're back to the 1 chord. Isn't that cool? It's just right up the arpeggio though. I wasn't straying from it at all. And then the classic blues, kind of Robert Johnson style turnaround. And all I'm doing for that is picture your G chord using the E shape where you've got your bar on that 3rd fret. You're going to come to that G note there on that 3rd fret 1st string, and then you're going to be in that same fret, 3rd fret, but we're going to be in the 4th string. And you can walk it down. That's where you hit this top note, this top G note twice while this walks down chromatically. That's all you're doing. And then there's your D7, and I'm playing it up here using the C7 shapes. Like my C chord, slide it up 2 frets, add your pinky, and that's what I'm doing for a 5 chord. Just remember this little turnaround and how it connects to your 1 chord. If you can remember that, you can play it anywhere in any key. So if you're playing in B flat, right? You can do it anywhere now. I hope that's a light bulb for somebody. All right, well, hopefully you can hear how these arpeggios can fit into your lead and really define those chord tones and make your playing sound much more melodic. Even without a jam track, you can sort of tell where I'm at in space by just working those arpeggios in. Now, we just did everything in one position. If you'll come join us for part 2, we're going to learn it in a different position. We're going to use 2 of these same chord shapes, so there's not like a whole lot of new stuff to learn, but there are going to be new licks that we can apply to all of this. So we're going to do all of that in part 2. If you like this lesson, please leave a comment and let me know. I always appreciate that. Or if you've got questions about anything, leave a question as well. I do read through everything and I try and respond to everything. All right, we'll see you in part 2.